So, a speech from John Ball, I think he was a minister preaching to the people. Goods should be held in common. There should be no peasant or gentry. We are all one and the same. And again, this might strike you as being similar to modern communism. And again, I'd like to point out that as an American, communism is completely anathema to us. But it has nothing to do with our history, our system. But to Europeans, it's going to be more appealing. It's kind of hard to understand why Europe follows communism more than Americans do. And here's pretty much the reason. Again, Marx will point to history, that Europe has a longer history of being drawn to communism. Anyway, this revolt, this peasant army actually approaches London. Here's Wat Tyler and his peasant army approaching the city of London. And the king at the time is Richard II. Not a great king, but this revolt reaches him. And he agrees to meet with Tyler, Wat Tyler, just a peasant. And at the meeting, Tyler is killed by a noble. Apparently, there was a drink brought out, and Tyler somehow disrespected the king in some way. And the noble stepped up and just slew him on the spot. And that's pretty much the end of the rebellion. The rebels will then scatter. The army will scatter as the nobles and the king have taken charge here. And Ball eventually will be hunted down and killed. Here's a drawing of the death of Wat Tyler as a noble just kills him on the spot. Here's a picture of him driving a sword through his head. So a terrible end for Wat Tyler, and the revolt pretty much dissipates after that. So a very interesting incident, though. Another aspect of this is the constant warfare. The 1300s is full of warfare, and the reason for this is you've got lots of little states. The Crusades are over. These warriors come home, and they begin battling each other. The rise of kings. You're starting to see some really powerful kingdoms rise up and fight and take over these little states. And then sometimes you'll have quarrels over succession. It just doesn't turn out that a king passes power easily to his son. He may have several sons who begin to fight with each other. You might have a king who doesn't have any sons, and the quarrel will begin for an uncle or a nephew somehow. The greatest of these wars in the 1300s is the 100 Years' War. And sadly, it's actually longer than 100 years, 1337 to 1353. Of these dates, this is the one you need to know. 1337, if you just want to memorize that, you can. But 1453 is going to be a really important date, the end of this war. Who's fighting? It's the King of France versus the King of England, or actually kings of France versus kings of England, because this goes on for over 100 years. What are they fighting over? Well, it's land. An important piece of territory is going to be caught between them. It's a territory called Aquitaine, what the French later will call Gascony. The Romans called it Aquitaine. There's a lot of rivers, the land of rivers they called it. Well, this goes back to the 1200s, the problem of Aquitaine, because you would think it's a French territory. It's down in the southwest part of France. It looks closer to France than England. Well, the problem goes back to the 1200s. Eleanor of Aquitaine, this woman, inherited this property from her father. Very unusual for a woman to inherit that huge chunk of property, but her father made this arrangement. Here's a map showing Aquitaine. Aquitaine is this giant area in southwestern France. And then we're also going to have a problem in this war over Normandy. But let's talk about Aquitaine first. Aquitaine, given to Eleanor of Aquitaine, her immediate suitor, as soon as she gets this huge piece of French territory, is the King of France, and he's going to marry her. And they went on crusade together. Apparently it was a terrible event for both of them. They come back from the crusade, and he moves for divorce. We get his side of the story. He tells the Pope all kinds of terrible things about her, and the Pope grants the divorce. And so in order to get back at this terrible King of France, she goes and marries his worst enemy. She marries the King of England, Henry II, the King of England. She has lots of sons with this king. Perhaps you've heard of some of them. One of her sons with the King of England is Richard the Lionheart, who later will be King of England. And he is famous as a great warrior on the Third Crusade. He went on the Third Crusade and fought the Muslims. He fought Saladin in the Holy Lands. And he got captured on his way back. He got captured, and it's up to his younger brother to get him out, to raise the hostage money, the ransom money. So there's Richard the Lionheart, greatest king of England, who never spent much time in England. So it's Prince John who has to raise the ransom, and he's always raising money, always increasing taxes, and never really getting his brother out. And so we call him Evil Prince John, and then later, Evil King John. And this is also the legend of Robin Hood, that this evil King John with his crushing taxes, there must be a hero out there taking the money back and giving it to the poor. But evil King John is also, there's a picture of him, evil King John is also famous for being a terrible king. In one of his wars, his nobles have had enough of him, and they force him to sign a document, 1215, the Magna Carta. It's King John who signs it, giving away some of his power, giving the nobles the right to have a parliament, a place where they can speak about taxation. So 1215, bad King John signing the Magna Carta. And of course, the history of England is that starting from 1215, taking power away from the king or queen. Well, let's get back to the 100 Years' War here. 1337, it's on over property disputes in Aquitaine and in Normandy. And the war is fought in France. Again, England is fighting for these territories on the mainland. And so what they do is they raid. England never has much of a great population. They got a lot of sheep, but not a great population and not many knights. And so they will come over to the mainland and basically raid. They'll be raiding into Gascony or Aquitaine and raiding into Normandy, basically under the heading that, well, since we're outnumbered here, the English are always outnumbered, we can't hold this. We'll just tear it up so that you can't use it either. Until you give it to us, we'll just keep tearing it up so that you can't use it. Well, being outnumbered, they will turn to some expedients here, and they turn to the peasants. England has a long history of arming its peasants. It goes back to the Viking Age when you'd better be armed because the Vikings were everywhere. English peasants and Welsh peasants were armed, and so they'll call upon these peasants. The English will come over, peasants, with pikes. This is a long stick with a spike on the end of it. Not as good as Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great's army worked like this, but not nearly as not as bad as this army. This is a very medieval army. These peasants just have pikes, not a whole lot of organization. What they're doing is they're protecting these longbows. The Welsh, their national weapon is the longbow, this powerful weapon that arrows can penetrate armor. And so the pikemen will defend the longbows. This is the English army. This is what the French want. The French want this. They want a war of knights versus knights. Knights train their entire life to fight other knights. And instead what you get is French knights going to be killed by these longbowmen, these peasants, these armed peasants. You've trained your entire life, this valuable war horse and valuable armor, and you get knocked off your horse by a dirty peasant with a longbow. Well, here's a map of the war. The blue area, the purple area will be in the area in dispute along the coastline of Gascony, and then Normandy, and then extending all the way down into Paris. There's Paris right there. So the English sometimes will raid even past Paris. I want to mention a couple of battles to illustrate this war, and I'm going to start in 1347 at the Battle of Crécy. This is up in the north. An English army lands, raiding up there, and the French come out to meet them. And then later on, 10 years later exactly, the Battle of Poitiers, more in central France. What happens in these battles is pretty much the same thing over and over again. The English being outnumbered, they take a defensive position. They put their knights in the center, sometimes on horseback, sometimes on foot, and then they will put their longbows and pikemen on the flanks. So you have a center of English knights with bowmen on the flanks, defended by pikes. And what happens is the French will be enthusiastic, outnumbering the English and want to drive them off the land, and they will come barreling toward the center knights, and then the longbowmen will just massacre them in the middle. What you have here at Crécy and Poitiers, just astounding English victories as they slaughter thousands of French knights. In fact, in these two battles, pretty much generation after generation of French knights are mown down in these 100-Year War battles. And of course, the question is, are the French just stupid as they go toward the English and get killed by longbows? Well, they're not completely stupid. It's just that this is the way that they fight. They won't use peasants of their own, and so they have disdain for the English peasants, and they just ignore them, basically, hoping the English will fight them man to man. Here's a picture of the Battle of Crécy, or an artist representation, an English army with its longbowmen here versus a French army with its attempt to match them. They will actually have crossbowmen. The French will actually hire mercenary crossbowmen. And of course, the problem with this is crossbows don't go as far as a longbow, and mercenaries don't fight as well as the English peasants here who, they're looking for money. They're looking to make a fortune off this. So this war just drags on for over 100 years. And really, it's not just one war. We call it the 100 Years' War, but it's actually a series of wars and series of peace treaties. At the time, you would have known all the names of the wars and all the names of the treaties. We just lump them all together as a 100 Years' War. And again, the problem with this is the English don't have the resources. They can smash French armies and hold sometimes French land, but eventually they're going to be driven back because they don't have the resources. So they'll end up just destroying the land. The English will just destroy anything. Since they can't own it, they'll destroy it. And of course, the poor French peasants will just have to run or hide or just try to find somewhere else to live. It's a terrible time for the French. It's also made worse by the fact that you've got terrible French kings. This 100-year period here is just a terrible time for the French kings. You've got a line of kings that is just terribly weak. And where you have a weak king, you're going to have powerful dukes. The French dukes will rise up against their kings. You know, we have this myth that everyone believes in the king and supports the king unconditionally because they swore an oath. Well, that's not always true. You know, these French dukes are looking for any moment when they could become the king of France. In fact, some of these dukes were pretty much planning on that. The Duke of Normandy, the Duke of Orleans, looking to replace the French line. They're plotting always against their king, sometimes siding with the English against the French king. As we reach 1415, we should be able to wrap this war up. We got a new king of England. His name is Henry V, this young, energetic king. He builds a huge army, takes an expedition to France, an army of over 10,000 knights, and then supported by maybe 10,000 or more peasants. He lands in Normandy and does what English kings do. They raid deep into French territory. Every soldier would have a big sack of loot that they're planning on taking home. And in this case, they're out there plundering, and then disease hits the army. Well, disease hits your army, you head back to the shore and get back on the boat and go back to England. Well, this time a French army comes out, an army of over 30,000. This is a huge French army, and blocks the English from getting back to the coast. I think after 100 years, maybe the French have learned something here. They've blocked the English off the coast. The battle will be fought up here in northern France. English landed here, raided deep into France, and then are heading back out of France when they get blocked. The battle is fought at Agincourt, a little town called Agincourt, and it's in October 1415, so weather's getting a little cold now. The English definitely want to get out of there now. So here's the English army right here. They're heading up this road trying to get out of France when they're blocked by a massive French army. Well, the English do what they always do. They take a defensive position, being outnumbered, and they take a defensive position between these two woods here, and you will see a line of English knights with their longbowmen kind of interspersed among them. And then, well, from the French point of view, what do? You've been waiting a century for this moment when the English are really in a desperate situation. And again, the poorness of the French army comes in, a bad French king, bad French leadership, and they do what they shouldn't do, which history should have taught them by now. They just come charging straight down the road into this death meat grinder. Similar, like, reminds me of World War I. French soldiers being chewed up by machine guns. In this case, they'll be chewed up by these longbows as they just come marching into this death trap. Here's a artist representation. There's the English army here with the French coming down. This representation shows them on horseback, and they weren't. They were actually on foot. Everyone was on foot pretty much in this battle. It was an October day. The weather was cold. The ground was soggy, and French knights are just getting chewed up on the ground, getting hit by arrows. Terrible, terrible day for the French army. And a great day for Henry V. This is the kind of stuff that Shakespeare will write plays about. Wrote a play called Henry V, where Henry V gives great speeches and leads his warriors into battle, his band of brothers. Well, after the Battle of Agincourt, the French are completely ruined here, and they will propose a marriage. The King of France will propose a marriage to the King of England to bring peace. Now, what we have here is Henry V to marry a French princess, one of the King of France's daughters, a daughter of Charles VI. Now, you don't need to know anything much about this King Charles VI except that his son is going to become important. And here he gives away his daughter to the King of England. And in the agreement, if they have a son, which they will, that the son of Henry V and the French princess will wear both crowns, the King of England and the King of France, and that will stop the 100 Years' War. Now, the problem in this is that Charles VI actually has a son. He has to disown his own son. He will tell his own son that he's been disowned. His son's name is Charles. And I'm going to go ahead and spoil it for you. He will eventually be King of France. He will be Charles VII later on. But let's talk about what's happening with this marriage. Henry V, here's the young king, here's the marriage here. Great moment in English history, kind of a sad moment in French history. But it should end the war because they do have a son. Henry V has a son with the French princess, Henry VI, eventually to be Henry VI. Unfortunately, when the baby is just born, when he's only 9 months old, 2 deaths happen. His father dies and his grandfather died in the same year. Charles VI, the King of France, dies, and Henry V, the King of England, dies, leaving a baby with both crowns. Well, a baby can't rule, and so you have a regency. When you have a baby boy to be king, you have a regency, and the regency is the worst type of regency. It is a regency of his uncles and various nobles, and of course all they're in it for is to enrich themselves. So nobody's taking care of this boy. They just want to enrich themselves to rule France and England. Well, into this bad situation, we got to go back to that boy, the boy that was disinherited, the son of Charles VI, the Dauphin. This is the French word for a prince, a king to be. Charles, to be Charles VII eventually. Well, the problem with this is he's not crowned. He never was crowned, and you can't just claim to be king. You actually have to have a crown. And not to mention the fact that the French believe they also have to be anointed by a holy oil. This goes back to the days of Charlemagne. A holy oil. And the holy oil is held at the city of Rheims. This is up in northeastern France, where the English are. So the English are up in northern France, where this city is, where the holy oil is. So how are you going to be crowned king? Here's the map. Charles, the Dauphin, is hanging out at a chateau somewhere on the Loire. The English are up here. They control Paris. There's the city of Rheims. So it's a long way for him to get to this city. And, who's going to help him? The war should be over. Well, into our story comes Joan of Arc, this French girl. Her French name, Jeanne d'Arc. But it's okay to call her Joan of Arc. Everyone calls her Joan of Arc. So, but she is French. You must understand that. Born in 1412, around the time of Agincourt. She was just a baby when that battle happened. And I'm going to go ahead and spoil it for you. She doesn't live very long. She'll live to be about 19 years old. She is born in the town of Domremy, which is in northeastern France. That's where the English are. They're up in northeastern France. And up there is the legend, because we're near Lorraine, is the legend of a maid of Lorraine. The legend goes that a virgin girl will save France. Well, is this the girl? She begins to hear voices. At about the age of 13, she begins hearing voices. And they are 3 saints, and they tell her nice things. They tell her to be a good girl, to go to church, to confess her sins, to do penance, to obey her parents, to just be a good girl. And then they change. At about the age of 17, they tell her that she is going to be the maid of Lorraine. She's going to save France. The voices tell her to go to the Dauphin in 1429, to go to the Dauphin at the city of Chinon on the Loire River, and she is going to take the Dauphin to be anointed King of France. Well, this is quite a thing for a 17-year-old girl. She's in a war zone where armies are roaming around. The voices tell her to dress like a man or a boy in order to get through the armies without being molested. And she does. She will wear men's clothing, and she will actually tell people about this. This isn't a secret. She tells people, and they will defend her and escort her to Chinon, where the Dauphin awaits her. And here's the picture of the Dauphin, future King Charles VII. And they check her out. I mean, some people believe her unconditionally. Other people are skeptical. The ways they check her is that when she's introduced to the king, they actually put an imposter there, and she immediately recognized it as an imposter and went directly to the king or the Dauphin. And then they checked her virginity. She had to be a virgin, and nuns will check her virginity and say it's okay. And Charles believes her, and he is going to give her an army. She's going to get an army and an armor here, and she is going to lead the French into battle and win a great victory at Orleans, and then take the king, or Charles the Dauphin, to Rheims to be anointed, to be Charles VII. She does it. As the voices commanded, she does it. And then unfortunately for her, this Dauphin leaves. He is going to just take the crown and the anointment and head back to Chinon. Well, what do you do now? She did what she was supposed to do, but she has an army behind her, and these soldiers begin encouraging her, hey, you can lead us. You win victories we've never won before. And unfortunately for Joan, she's going to go beyond the voices and lead an army toward the English, toward Paris. And she's captured. In 1430, she's captured by, of all people, the Burgundians. The Duke of Burgundy captures her and sells her to the English. It's not a good day in French history that they have betrayed her. Her own people have betrayed her. What the English do is they put her on trial. What they want to do is discredit her. People believe that she is the voice of God, that she is the representative of God. The saints are speaking to her. So they need to disprove this. They need to show that she is not hearing voices of saints, but she's hearing voices of the devil. And they do nasty things to her as far as torture goes. They keep her awake. They badger her, just nonstop, not physical attacks, but mental attacks on her, torture. And then they eventually figure a way to get to her. They take her out and show her a bundle of sticks that they're going to burn her at. And they tell her that the only way she can survive this is if she signs a piece of paper saying not to wear, she won't wear men's clothing anymore. And she actually does sign it. There's her signature on this document saying she won't wear men's clothing anymore. They take her back to the prison where she begins being raped. The prison guards rape her now that she's wearing women's clothing. And so she goes back to men's clothing, and that's what they catch her on, that she had signed that she wouldn't do this anymore. They catch her on the technicality, take her out, and are going to burn her. She'll be burned at the city of Rouen. This poor 19-year-old girl, tricked, tortured, and tricked in the end. Well, what's the point of all this? The significance of Joan of Arc is that, well, France has a king now, for one, a French king. But the importance of Joan of Arc is that she's not discredited. She was not shown to be some kind of agent of the devil or something, that people believe her. Even her captors really believed her. She becomes French identity, that, you know, what men couldn't do, this woman, this pure girl could do. She becomes the identification of what it is to be French. She unifies them now, that these French who have been working against each other and working at different ends now begin to unify to follow the dream of Joan of Arc, driving the English out of France. And they will do this. And then eventually Joan will be made a saint. She has to have miracles done, and it won't be till World War I that enough French soldiers believe she'd perform miracles that she's eventually made a saint. Well, let's talk about the new king, Charles VII. He is a bad king as far as meanness. He's a mean guy. But as far as a king, he recognized how to win this war. Do it slowly. You don't need to go charging into these death traps with these longbows. And he will work slowly, pressing the English wherever they aren't. France is a big country. They can't be everywhere. And gradually driving the English out of France. By 1453, he's accomplished this. The English are only at Calais. They only hold one city on the continent after a while, the city of Calais, directly across from Dover. And this wraps the war up. 1453 is the end of the 100 Years' War. There is no treaty, but the fighting stops. The English are allowed to have one foothold on the continent. So what's the result of all this? Why talk about the 100 Years' War, this nasty, nasty, terrible war, Joan of Arc? Well, the results of it is that for France, they come out of this great. They come out of it with a strong king. He's a bad guy, but he's a strong king. He has developed a standing army, an army that stays on guard 12 months. It doesn't just appear for 3 months and then go back home. A standing army. Well, how do you do this? You do this through taxation. He has come up with a tax called scutage. And what this is he will tell his nobles, you owe me 3 months of service every year, but if you don't want to, you don't have to, but you have to pay me. And a lot of these nobles don't want to die in another Agincourt or something, so they will pay money to him instead of military service. And that's what he uses, this money from the nobles, to build his standing army. But it's also more than that. He is recognized that there's a new weapon out there. It's not the longbow, it's gunpowder, and he's going to put a lot of money into the perfection of gunpowder. Gunpowder had been around